Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Start From Within series. If you are not familiar with me, hello, I'm Tamisha Williams. I am the owner of Tamisha Williams Consulting. And on a regular basis, I help educators and school leaders recognize and address their biases, manage conflict, navigate and manage their emotions, promote equity and wellness. And I do that through a range of social and emotional learning services like this series. If you are not familiar with the Start From Within series, welcome. This is our second video. This series is going to be a free monthly opportunity where I share exercises and tools via the internet that are going to help you to increase your self-awareness, cultivate a healthy emotional capacity, and promote equity and wellness. You can access all of the resources at startfromwithin.com. If you haven't already seen our first video, it's on core values, and again, available at startfromwithin.com. If you purchase the From Within workbook, then you may be familiar with some of the exercises throughout this series. If you're interested in another tool and resource, head over to fromwithinworkbook.com and you can have access to that resource as well. So here's what you can expect throughout today's video. First, I'll tell you what dorsal practices are, and then I'll talk to you about why doing this exercise is going to be helpful. We'll then actually walk through the dorsal practices exercise. You can actually follow along with me and pause the video to do the reflection live. And last but not least, I will always in my videos share facilitation tips. So if you want to take these videos and do them with your team, your family, your organization, then you can get some tips from me on how to do that successfully. All right, let's get started. What are dorsal practices? I was first introduced to the term dorsal practices by Alexis Pauline Gumbs in her book, Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. When we think about dorsal fins, right, they function in aquatic animals to help with stability. Dorsal fins provide balance as those animals move throughout the rough waters of the ocean and also help them in making swift movements when they need to. It's said that dolphins evolved their dorsal fins over time. I love the way that Alexis puts this. Let me read you this quote. Dolphins evolved dorsal fins from practice across generations by accepting that the ocean would always move and becoming accordingly, an embodied emphasis towards balance. Love that. So if dolphins and whales are using their dorsal fins for stabilizing and support in the rough waters of the sea, how might we use dorsal or stabilizing practices to help stabilize us in this ever-changing world and also to help us navigate oppressive environments? In her meditative book, Alexis Pauline Gumbs describes dorsal practices as intentional and often intergenerational core practices that stabilize us, that center us, that help us build community, and help us pivot swiftly when we need. I'm going to share some of my dorsal practices with you as we go throughout the exercise. So let's get into it. Why might it be important for you to engage in this exercise? The dorsal practice exercise encourages us to be intentional about what we take in and put out. Essentially, we are what we practice and what we repeat, right? So we want to be practicing and repeating exercises throughout our days and our daily life that help to keep us centered and stable. Additionally, this practice also helps us to reflect on what our stabilizing practices are and think about ways to prioritize those so that we can engage in them on a regular basis. Now let's move into the dorsal practice exercise. Let me stop my screen real quick so that I can share what that exercise looks like. If you want to follow along with us, head over to startfromwithin.com. You can then get access to the dorsal practices worksheet there. I'll share my screen so you can see what that looks like. All right. Okay, so when you go to startfromwithin.com and you access the Cultivate Dorsal Practices worksheet, this is what you'll see. Let me zoom in for you. It's a Google document, so you'll have an opportunity to make a copy for yourself so that you can type within it. I'll also have a PDF version available. You can type into the document, and so again, type your reflection as you go. And again, all of the information that we're about to go through in this video is already on the document, walking you through the exercise yourself. Let's go on back to present mode. And I'm going to facilitate you through the exercise right now. As a reminder, if you have the From Within workbook, you can also take a look at pages 51 through 53, the Activate Your Dorsal Fin chapter. This particular exercise is going to complement that chapter and actually give it a little bit more nuance. So what are your dorsal practices? Let's actually pause before we dive into this exercise and get ourselves centered for reflection. I invite you to join me in a centering exercise where we just notice our breath. If you feel safe in your environment and comfortable doing so, take a moment, close your eyes, or at least gaze downward, and start by taking several deep breaths. As you breathe in fresh life, fresh energy. As you exhale, release things that are no longer serving you. Notice the rise and the fall of your chest or your stomach as you inhale and exhale. Notice the temperature under your nose as you breathe in and breathe out. I invite you to take one final breath. Allow your breathing to get back to its normal pace. Open your eyes and join me back here. Thank you and joining me for that practice, again, just to transition us into a reflective mode. Let's head back to the practice. So the first question is, what are your dorsal practices? Let's first focus on the practices that we have already cultivated. Remember, dorsal practices are intentional core practices that help to stabilize us, center us, build community, and also pivot swiftly as we need to navigate oppressive environments. Some of my dorsal practices are daily prayer and meditation. I do moon journaling, where I actually journal depending on the different phases of the moon. I engage in a gratitude practice when I'm walking my dog, usually asking myself, what are 3 things that we're grateful for? I'm a member of an African dance company, and just dance in general is a really grounding practice for me. I love going on solo dates, taking myself out to lunch, and again, just having that quiet time. I will often end the evenings with some reading, just 1 or 2 chapters, maybe more, of a really great new YA novel. I also love to gather with others, people that I love, family, friends, people in my network. And last but not least, one of my dorsal practices are just neighborhood walks, really taking time to be in nature and also move my body. I'm inviting you now to pause the video here. Consider, what are your dorsal practices? Now that you've considered some of your dorsal practices, I'm going to be asking you to consider some of the waves that you're currently navigating in this ocean called life. What practices might you need to cultivate to navigate through some of these waves? Your waves may be related to home life or work life, to finances, to relationship, perhaps to health and wellness. One of the ways that I know I'm anticipating this week is travel for work. While travel for work can be really rewarding, it can also be very stressful. I have to drive to DC. That traffic up there is a mess. I also have to engage live with people for a full day. It's a lot of energy I'll be putting out. So when I think about that wave, and I think about perhaps a dorsal practice that I may need to cultivate just for this week specifically, one of the things I consider is to have a mindful meal during my trip away, to have one meal that's by myself where I'm really eating mindfully, engaging in my five senses. Okay. Engaging in my five senses. Perhaps I'm first going to look at my food, really take in the colors. Hopefully it's a colorful meal. I might then smell my food, right? Take in the different senses. Are there smells that are familiar to me, inviting, new, unusual? I might then also listen to my food. Is it sizzling? Is it because it's hot or boiling? Or if I stir it, does it slosh? I might also consider the texture of my food. Is it something that I'm holding and touching? And then I get an opportunity to taste my food. Mindful eating, I think, after a day of really spending time around a lot of people is going to give me a moment to really stabilize myself before moving forward. So that's one of the ways that I am anticipating a wave for this week, and that I also then am going to cultivate a new practice because of that particular wave. I'm inviting you now to pause the video here and consider, what are 1 to 3 waves that you're navigating this week at this point in your life? And what are some of the practices that you need to cultivate as you navigate those waves? All right, welcome back if you have paused the video. Let me go and stop sharing. So now that you know your dorsal practices and you have an opportunity to even consider how you might or why you might need to utilize them this week, I'm inviting you to get visual. So if you've been working in the From Within workbook, you know the importance of visuals. Our brains actually process information quicker when visuals are paired with text. And well, actually, our brains process visuals quicker anyway. When visuals are paired with text, our brains process it even faster. And it helps our brains to actually retain the information over a longer period of time. So visual aids improve both learning and comprehension. So what I'm going to be encouraging you to do is to create a visual reminder of your dorsal practices. This can be helpful in helping you to remember them on a regular basis. One of the things I did is to create a choice board, and I'll actually show you this on the screen so you can see it in more detail. My choice board stays in my office on a daily basis and is a reminder to me of some of the things that I can be doing throughout the day and throughout the week. Let me share my screen now so you can see that in more detail. All right, so there is my choice board. I'm very proud of it. You can see, right, I put images as a part of each of the different blocks. And then in the center is the question that sometimes I will ask myself, what does my body need at this moment? And then I can look at my dorsal practices and consider which one I want to engage in. The other reason that this visual is important is because sometimes we consider dorsal practices when something has gone wrong. I'm encouraging us to really utilize these practices on a regular basis. Dolphins and whales don't just pull out their dorsal fin when they need to navigate rough seawater or make swift movements. They have it all the time, right? So we have our dorsal practices all the time and should be regularly engaging in them. When we do, it actually helps us to lower our stress levels. It helps us to maintain and sustain happiness, even when circumstances are rough in our life. And it also helps to activate the parts of the brain that help us to empathize, to get innovative, and to make decisions that are more aligned with our core values. So pause the video here and create a visual for your dorsal practices. It doesn't have to be a choice board. That's just one option. Get creative. All right, welcome back. So it is helpful for us to acknowledge and even write down and visualize our dorsal practices, but it's also critical for us to consider and be intentional about ways that we're going to engage in them throughout the week. The next few reflection questions are going to be asking you to get very specific about how you plan to engage in dorsal practices this week. Also, what are some of the hurdles that may come up and prevent that? And how can you support yourself in pushing through those? So first, how will you engage in dorsal practices this week? So some of the things that I'm going to be intentionally doing is before I have meetings, activating my breath, right? 3 or more deep breaths to really transition myself into that space. If I have a virtual meeting, I'm going to commit to taking a walk or laying in the hammock afterwards. Again, moving my body, getting away from the screen, and helping again just to center myself in a different way. And I'm going to definitely at the end of my day read just to settle myself down, stabilize myself for the evening. Now, I can anticipate that there are going to be some things that get in the way of me engaging in my dorsal practices. The first is my inner saboteur that says, whoa, you've got back-to-back schedule some of these days. You don't have enough time. The other is perhaps someone reaches out to request a last-minute meeting, and then there could be internal and other internal and external pressures that come about. So given that I know some of those things are going to be coming my way, I'm also going to be pausing and considering who or what could support me in moving through those particular hurdles or moving past some of that internal resistance. One of the things that could support me is keeping my visual handy so that I have that regular reminder of practices that I should be engaging in. The other thing that could support me is by creating a 15-minute buffer between my meetings. So I actually have time to catch my breath, to move my body, to stay hydrated. Another thing that I do is I actually calendar my practices. Every day from 8 to 10 on my calendar is a reminder to engage in my daily routine. That's a great space for me to, again, do my prayer, meditation, to do some moon journaling, just to set myself up for the day. And then the last question in this section is, how will you hold yourself accountable? One of the ways that I hold myself accountable is by doing some nighttime or morning journaling so that I can say, how did today go? What worked well? Or how did yesterday go? What worked well? What do I want to shift? What's a dorsal practice that I might need to engage in today, considering what I have coming up? So I'm inviting you now to pause the video here and answer these reflection questions for yourself. How will you engage in dorsal practices this week? Be specific as you can. And how, again, will you hold yourself accountable to navigating those internal resistance or external pressures? I'm excited for you because you not only have your dorsal practices for this week, but you've set some intentions. So that's going to help you to really activate those throughout the week. Rough winds, strong storms are going to approach, and so you will have your dorsal fin practices ready. But remember to do this work in community. Share what you learned today about dorsal practices or just insight about yourself with someone else. Also, perhaps share this particular exercise or video with someone else. Send them over to startfromwithin.com so that they can also learn about practices that can help them stay centered and stabilize, build community, and navigate the rough waters of life. If you are interested in facilitating this exercise with your team, family members, with your organization, here are some of the tips that I have. The first tip that's not listed, but is most important, is to actually do this exercise for yourself first. And don't just do the exercise and rush through it. Take your time and then see what it's like to live that exercise out for a week. That's going to help you to understand what you needed to be in a really thoughtful and reflective space. It's going to help you to understand how much time it took you to thoughtfully reflect, so that as you facilitate for others, you can create a thoughtful environment. The first tip is to assess team culture. If you're thinking, there was an incident that just happened, this would be a great thing for our team to do. We want to make sure that you're not using this exercise as a Band-Aid. So if you've had an incident, or if there's a lot of mistrust in your team culture, or again, with the group that you want to facilitate with, I would first address that. Address some of the issues around conflict, around trust, around or discrimination that may be taking place, so that people actually feel comfortable reflecting in your environment and sharing with one another. Excuse me. Next, set the stage for reflection. What was useful to you in order to really sit down and think and reflect thoughtfully? Was it having materials around? Was it the space or the ambiance that you needed near you? If you're going to be facilitating, curate your environment, set the stage. Pause and leave room for silence. Again, if you have done this exercise by yourself, you can really consider how much time it took you to come up with answers that felt true to you without feeling rushed. Leave room for that silence in your space. Even if you have some nice soothing music playing in the background, don't rush people in their reflection and in their thinking. And it may also mean that it gets a little uncomfortable for you as a facilitator. That's okay. I often say, if you feel uncomfortable, add 5 seconds to that, breathe through it, and then call time. And then the last tip I would say is, don't ignore the play. Don't ignore getting visual. Sometimes that can be the most uncomfortable piece, especially for adults to engage in. Have the materials there, right? Really lean into it. Encourage your folks to play, to visualize. We know that it unlocks a lot of creativity and innovation. And if you're in a space, though, that doesn't prioritize creativity, visuals, or play, it can feel really uncomfortable, especially if people see play or visuals as not professional. Perhaps what you need to do then is share some of the research behind why play and why getting visual is actually critical to us building community. It helps us with our facilitation skills, also in problem solving. And again, just creating an environment where folks feel innovative and that they can trust in and be vulnerable. So don't ignore the play, try it out. And if you need to share the research with your team in order for them to lean into it, then do that. So now you know your dorsal practices. Thank you for your time and energy throughout this video. Feel free to connect with me. Please share, if you do a visual, share that with me on social media. Use the hashtag #StartFromWithin. I'm encouraging you throughout this week to try engaging in your dorsal practices. Notice what it feels like. What impact does it have on your health and well-being? For now, that's all, folks. So until we connect again, take care, stay well, and start from within.